A total of $75 was provided by parents. My grandfather left a substantial sum of money, earmarked for my sister's business, which she used to establish a $75,000 college fund. I initiated legal proceedings against her and was removed from the family home. However, the truth has now emerged, and the consequences have been severe. I am currently facing significant challenges, and I am struggling to cope. My life has always been difficult, but it was not always this way. My parents were narcissistic, and my sister, whom they regarded as their golden child, was the source of much of our family's difficulties. However, she is astute and opportunistic. She capitalized on our parents' emotional vulnerabilities to advance her own interests. I do not blame her. My parents have fostered this dynamic. She is their firstborn, and she occupies a privileged position in their affections. Nevertheless, I am also their daughter, and it is not uncommon for parents to have a favorite child. However, if the other child feels unwanted, this can have a detrimental impact on their well-being. My parents, for instance, made my life miserable and treated me as though I were a mere afterthought. I was often forced to wear my sister's discarded clothes because they were too new to be discarded. I was permitted to play with my sister's toys because there was no rationale for purchasing new ones when my sisters were still in good condition. I recall that I only received a new dress on Christmas, and that was largely because my parents wanted to present themselves well in front of Grandpa and other guests. They were keen to avoid being judged by friends and relatives. I was given one set of dresses, shoes, and other accessories on Christmas, while my sister received as many as she wanted. If I ever complained about it, my mother would say, "Don't be impatient. Your sister's stuff is going to come to you next year." That's right, but as a second-hand child, I accepted their rationale. However, as I began to comprehend the circumstances, I protested. I was either told that our family was too financially constrained to afford new sets for me, or I was punished for my behavior. I do not recall my mother inquiring about my preferences for dinner or preparing my favorite foods. Instead, the menu was always based on my sister's tastes. When I rebelled and refused to eat the food, I was sent away from the dinner table. I was confined to my room and deprived of food until I apologized to my parents and cleaned the dishes for the entire week. It is exhausting to recount these experiences, but they are a testament to the challenges I have faced. My mother, in particular, has a tendency to impose these restrictions, which I believe stems from her relationship with her sister. My mother has experienced difficulties in her own life. From narcissistic parents, she ensured that she would become one. It is noteworthy that the mother is the eldest of 2 siblings. She asserts that her parents favored the younger sibling and indulged her excessively. The mother experienced bias from her parents, which led her to refrain from lavishing the younger girl with attention. The elder sibling, I believe, represents a reflection of my mother's own childhood experiences. Consequently, she treats her younger sister in a manner that mirrors her own upbringing. This dynamic, which I experienced firsthand, fostered a sense of resentment towards both my parents and my sister. As a result, I spent a significant portion of my childhood summers with my grandfather. He was the only family member who demonstrated unconditional love and acceptance. My grandfather's perception of my mother's behavior, which he often found perplexing, may have been a contributing factor to his consistent support and encouragement. At his farm, I felt a profound sense of relief and freedom. I had never experienced such a profound sense of ease and relaxation. Grandpa provided me with everything I requested. I acknowledge that I may have been overly indulgent, but I fully embraced his generosity. I requested a vast array of items that I had previously lacked at home, including dresses, Barbies, dollhouses, video games, and other items that I had long desired but my parents had not provided. I cherished spending time with him at his farm, immersed in the natural environment. He owned a poultry farm and a modest stable with 4 to 5 horses. He dedicated his days to caring for them. Life was exceptionally enjoyable during those periods. When the time came for me to return home, I was reluctant to leave. Upon entering high school, I requested to be admitted to a school in proximity to my grandfather's residence. My parents were amenable to this arrangement, and from my freshman year onward, I resided with him. This arrangement was mutually beneficial, as he was advancing in age, and I required a supportive environment. He required assistance, and I sought an opportunity for respite from my toxic family. I was in my junior year of high school when Grandpa became unwell. It may have been his awareness that his time was limited, as he called upon his relatives and made his intentions known. He bequeathed his farm and stable to two of his uncles and a sum of $150. A total of $75 was allocated to my father. He made me promise that I would complete my college education. My mother was satisfied because others received properties and a farm, while my father received only a few grands. My grandfather reminded my father that he had already taken his share of the property and sold it to pay off his debt and start a business, just as I was beginning my senior year of high school. My grandfather's passing was a profoundly unfortunate event, marking the saddest day of my life. I currently find myself without a reliable source of support, having had to relocate to my parents' home. The experience has been far from pleasant, and I believe my parents share this sentiment, particularly as my graduation day approaches. I recently requested the $75,000 that my grandfather left for me, intending to use it for college applications. However, this has led to unexpected challenges. Whenever upon inquiring about the whereabouts of the funds, I was met with perplexed expressions and a refusal to engage in conversation. When I reached my limit, I asserted my demands and inquired as to the reason for this behavior. In response, I was informed that the money had been allocated to my sister's business venture. This revelation prompted me to question the rationale behind this decision, particularly given that the funds were intended for my college education. They asserted that it was not a significant issue and that I could wait for a year because I was still too young to attend college. I countered that I was not too young for college, given that my classmates of the same age had already been admitted, despite having been unable to provide a satisfactory explanation. They then attempted to persuade me to allow them a year to pay my college tuition. I responded that I was not aware of any reason why the golden child should be exempt from the same requirements. A year to start her business is an excessive amount of time. I must identify alternative sources of funding. Any suggestions? A great deal has transpired in the last few months. My parents requested that I postpone my plans for another year. I respectfully declined, prompting them to request the funds. They expressed displeasure and labeled me as mean and selfish. They are attempting to shift the blame. Furthermore, my sister Mandy has initiated a campaign to portray me as the antagonist. I lost my temper when my cousin informed me that Mandy is propagating the narrative that I am envious of her enterprise and seeking financial gain. I informed my mother that if they do not provide me with the funds, I will divulge the information that they have contravened Grandpa's last will and testament by withholding the money. My college tuition was paid for by my mother, who was incensed when I informed her that I would be pursuing legal action against my sister and her family. She demanded that I pay the rent and provide for myself, citing the 18 years of financial support she had provided me. I countered that my sister's family was still providing for their adult daughter, who is divorced with a child, despite her financial circumstances. Despite my academic achievements, I was never praised by my parents. In contrast, their favored child, who had fallen pregnant, was supported by them. I did not mention my sister in my account of living with my grandfather. She had become pregnant by her boyfriend and, by the time she tested it, it was too late to terminate the pregnancy. She was compelled to inform my parents, who expressed disappointment but were unable to intervene. My mother, a conservative Christian, arranged for her to marry her boyfriend, despite their reluctance to wed. My sister was forced to marry due to her mother's influence. Her boyfriend was, in any case, unsuitable as a life partner. He had no intention of marrying her. My parents assumed responsibility for the child, but my sister's ex-partner pursued them after the birth. My parents attempted to hold him legally accountable, but he had evidence of my sister's mental abuse. He filed for divorce on this basis, and my parents had to bring her back home. They have been providing care for Mandy and her child since Grandpa's death. Upon my return home, I discovered that my mother was the primary caregiver for our child, as my sister was often absent. My father expressed his displeasure at my sister's decision to leave her child in my mother's care. My mother defended her actions, stating that my sister was seeking employment and therefore unavailable to care for the child. However, I had observed my sister frequently loitering in the vicinity of the child, suggesting that her stated reason for being absent was not entirely truthful. She frequented nearby cafes and parks with boys. She had not completed her education, which made it challenging for her to secure gainful employment. Despite this, she requested financial assistance from her mother to start her own business. My parents provided her with the necessary funds without my input. However, I was unaware of my legal rights until I posted on this forum. I demanded the return of the money, except for asking them. Consequently, the following time I requested the money and they resisted. I informed them that I would be initiating legal proceedings against them for violating Grandpa's will. Their demeanor immediately changed. They realized that I was no longer the vulnerable individual they could exploit. After returning from Grandpa's, I had already begun to assert my autonomy, and upon informing them of my intention to pursue legal action for financial restitution, they exhibited a profound shift in demeanor. It was as if they had been struck by a bolt of realization. I, who had previously been perceived as a naive and susceptible individual, had become a formidable adversary. My mother, in a gesture of defiance, took out a notebook and began to document the monthly expenses she had incurred on my behalf. I was astonished to see that she had allocated a quarter of the total expenditure in my name, including the school fees and the cost of a Christmas dress. She was visibly impressed as she made her mark on the page. When she had finished, she stated, "Forget about the $75K you owe us. Pay us $200K before asking for your $75K. I engaged in a heated discussion with my mother and subsequently left the house after spending an hour waiting nearby. I took a bus to my grandfather's house, where my uncle was currently residing. I requested to see Grandpa's diary and proceeded to. I contacted his lawyer and provided an account of the circumstances. I inquired as to whether he could assist me. He affirmed that I was entitled to the $75K, which my grandfather had left for me. He stated that it was his responsibility to ensure that everyone received the funds as per the will. He said that he would be sending an official notice to my parents to provide me with the money. In the event that they fail to comply, I have the option of pursuing legal action against them. This is a significant development. The notice is likely to reach them soon. In a week, I am gratified to receive assistance, but I am equally concerned about my parents' reaction upon receiving the notice. I am uncertain of their response. This update will be brief. I simply wanted to inform you that my parents will likely be displeased. I was mentally prepared for the imminent separation. I discussed with a friend the possibility of sharing the condo with her. I considered taking up a part-time job. I was gainfully employed at a cafe, but the remuneration was insufficient. However, the proprietors permitted me to retain some leftover food at closing time. I had already packed my belongings a day before the notice arrived, as anticipated. My mother expelled me upon receipt of the notice from the lawyer. She subjected me to mistreatment and evicted me from the residence. I erred in not relocating before allowing them to evict me. She described me as a snake. They have been feeding in our backyard because I lived and survived on their money while planning on biting and backstabbing them. I informed them that they had left me with no options and that I could not jeopardize my life and my career because of their narcissism. The lawyer had given a month's time to my parents to respond to the notice, which they are about to breach. I believe they are not taking it seriously because Mandy called and she verbally abused me for challenging the family's authority. She asserted that my parents would not provide financial assistance and that I was powerless to take legal action due to a lack of resources. I did not divulge my personal information to her. Instead, I listened to her demands and, when I reached my limit, terminated the call. I informed my lawyer about the incident and he advised that we could pursue legal action if they did not respond by next week. Update 3, I faced significant repercussions from my parents for initiating legal proceedings against them. I had no desire to pursue criminal charges against them, but circumstances compelled me to do so. I anticipated that the lawyer's notice would prompt compliance with Grandpa's will. However, they did not respond to the lawyer's demand. I returned home to inform them that they would have to comply with Grandpa's will or face legal consequences. They collectively opposed me, hurled insults at me, and my mother even threw objects at me. I had left some of the non-essential items at home. I was in possession of essential items at my residence. My mother removed them from my closet and destroyed them in my presence, inflicting emotional distress. I had come to the residence to resolve the matter without resorting to legal action. However, it appeared that they sought to avoid legal consequences. I returned to my lawyer's office and informed him of the incident. He proceeded to file charges against my parents. My father called me and suggested that we address the underlying familial issues without resorting to legal action. I returned home to attempt to resolve the outstanding familial issues, but the other party became hostile and refused to engage in constructive dialogue. Consequently, I am now pursuing legal recourse. I am not willing to compromise on this matter. The court hearings revealed that, according to Grandpa's will, the father was required to pay $75. However, the father presented evidence indicating that he did not possess sufficient funds to meet this obligation. He proposed a monthly payment of $10,000, but the attorney representing the daughter argued that this amount was inadequate to cover her college tuition. The attorney therefore ordered that the father would have to pay the tuition directly. Other needs, such as accommodation and food, were to be met up to a minimum value of $75,000. In the event that my expenditure exceeded this amount, I would be responsible for meeting the shortfall. If my expenditure did not cover the $75,000, my father would be required to provide the remaining funds. I was not entirely comfortable with this arrangement, as it would still place me in a position of financial dependence on my father. However, I had no alternative but to accept it. My father did not possess the $75,000 to provide me with it. At first, I rejected this compromise, but my father implored me with tearful eyes and promised that he would not default. I acquiesced, but I informed him that in the event that he or my mother raises any objections in the future, I intend to sue them again, and this time I will demand compensation for the mental anguish. Meanwhile, my mother and Mandy proceeded behind my back. Mandy has been informing others that I have caused my parents to develop hypertension and brought disgrace to the family by initiating legal proceedings. This is an example of irony. There was no disgrace or shame when she became pregnant, yet I was subjected to criticism for merely requesting my own money. I am no longer concerned about this matter. I have been labeled as an outcast, but I am content with my status. I have not provided an update for some time. I have been adjusting to a new lifestyle at university. I graduated from high school with the highest grades. I sent the convocation invitations to my parents, who did not attend. My father was present and seemed pleased. This was the first time he had shown such emotion. He stated that he was proud of me. It took him 18 years in a legal proceeding to recognize that I was also his daughter and that I, too, required love and care. I have since moved on from this experience. I resigned from my position at the cafe and relocated to my dormitory on campus. The financial support I receive from my father covers my tuition, accommodation, and food. Beyond that, I am responsible for my own expenses. I have taken on a part-time job to supplement my income. I am currently employed in a position that is conveniently located near the campus of my educational institution. Additionally, I provide mathematics tutoring services to my fellow students, which allows me to earn supplementary income. I am particularly adept at mathematics, which is a skill I am proud of. My father has been consistently sending the court-ordered payments, as he is required to do. Some of you have inquired about my relationship with my father in his absence during the period when my mother was behaving abusively towards me. I will now explain the situation. My father was aware of the difficulties I was facing, yet he chose to remain silent. He disregarded my concerns and never questioned my mother's actions. He acquiesced to her demands, even going so far as to endorse her decision to use my sister's clothes for me, apparently because he believed she was saving his money throughout my childhood. I have observed my father facing financial challenges, so it is understandable that he sought any opportunity to save money. He was always willing to contribute financially, so it is understandable that he supported his wife. However, I am uncertain about his reaction to Mandy's unexpected pregnancy. My knowledge of this event is limited to what I have heard from relatives. Mandy's wedding was conducted in a very private manner, and I was not informed of the date or details. At the time, I was living with my grandfather, and I was not concerned about what was happening at my parents' house. My current situation is one of immense satisfaction. I am living my dream life, attending college and securing good grades. My relationship with my father has improved significantly following the legal proceedings. My mother and Mandy engaged in a series of negative interactions, portraying me as the antagonist. However, they soon faced their own challenges. Mandy was involved in an incident with the police, and the funds she had borrowed were seized. Mandy had established a clandestine gambling enterprise under the guise of a gaming zone, unbeknownst to my parents. They believed it to be a legitimate gaming parlor, but the authorities intervened and confiscated all the equipment and assets, including the funds in her bank account. My parents utilized these funds to secure her release, leaving her with no resources. This was the result of her exploitation of my grandfather's hard-earned wealth. I am gratified to have been instrumental in recovering funds that I had been led to believe were lost. I had reservations about confronting my father, given the circumstances. However, I am pleased that I did so, as it became evident that Mandy had used the money for illicit purposes. She had opened a gambling business, which was a cause for concern. My father subsequently expelled her from the family home. My mother attempted to intercede on her behalf, but my father was unyielding. From Mom's perspective, the choice was clear, either Mandy or Dad. As Mom is not employed, she selected Dad and requested that Mandy secure employment and relocate. Mandy has leveraged her child as a means of emotional manipulation, persuading Dad to allow her to reside in the house. This strategy proved effective until the gambling incident. However, Dad has since ceased to tolerate her actions and has evicted her. She is currently residing with a friend, but it remains uncertain how long this arrangement will last. The last time I was contacted for assistance, it was not forthcoming. After the considerable distress caused to me and my mother by the aforementioned individual, I would prefer to be left alone. I will not refrain from further humiliating her today, before writing this update. I was reading my initial post and it evoked a strong emotional response. I was in a very challenging situation at the time. I had just lost my support system, having been defrauded by my parents and my grandfather. I was confined to my residence by my narcissistic parents. I was a college student at the time, and the future was shrouded in uncertainty. I was overwhelmed by feelings of helplessness and despair. However, I am grateful to this community for providing me with invaluable support. I still miss my grandfather, who was a significant influence in my decision to pursue higher education. I believe he is my guardian angel, bestowing blessings upon me from his place of rest. I now embark on the next chapter of my story. My wife has been unfaithful to me with a man who is, by all accounts, rather romantic. As a result of this liaison, she is now in a state of financial distress, burdened by the considerable debt incurred for the extravagant wedding she never asked me to pay for. I am a 49-year-old male, and I met my wife, a 49-year-old female, when we were in our 20s. We were friends for a period of time before we decided to date. The two of us dated for approximately a year, which is not a particularly lengthy period of time when viewed in the context of our entire relationship. However, at the time, it seemed as though we had been dating for a considerable length of time. She eventually brought up the topic of marriage, and I informed her that I would prefer to wait a little longer. A few months later, I was finally ready to propose to my then-girlfriend. She accepted, and the two of us began planning a wedding. This was around the time that I failed to identify the warning signs, perhaps because I was in love. My fiancé desired a lavish wedding, and while I recognized the value of such an experience, I questioned the necessity of spending a significant sum on a single day. I ultimately persuaded her to opt for a modest, intimate ceremony. She appeared supportive at the time, but as the months and years passed, she began to express resentment. As time passed, she began to express resentment for having been persuaded to opt for a smaller, more intimate wedding. It is important to note that at the time, financial constraints made a larger celebration unfeasible. I suggested that, at some point in the future, we could have a wedding that reflected her dreams. This suggestion was met with approval, but I sensed that underlying resentment remained. Was I the epitome of romanticism? No. However, I endeavored to sustain the romantic ambience by performing minor acts of affection for her over the years. My wife was aware of my efforts when we were wed. Additionally, we did not have children, thus eliminating the pressure that often accompanies parenthood. As the years elapsed, by the time we reached our 40s, we had been married for nearly 2 decades. Over the past year, the quality of my marriage had deteriorated to the extent that I felt the need to plan a romantic night out. I sought assistance from my sister, given my lack of experience in matters of a romantic nature. However, the planned event did not materialize. My wife did not return home that night, and when she did, she informed me that she had spent the evening at the home of a friend. She had consumed alcohol and, as a result, felt it was safer for her to remain there. I saw no reason to doubt her account, so I accepted her statement at face value. The following night, I attempted to initiate intimacy, but she rebuffed me, citing fatigue. I did not attach much significance to this, given that we both had demanding work schedules, which enabled us to afford the lifestyle we were currently leading. The pattern persisted, reaching a point where I had to question whether I should continue to believe her untruths. I sought to ascertain her whereabouts by contacting her friends, but they provided her with cover. I was not surprised to discover that she was unfaithful. I decided to confront her directly about her lies and ask her if she was cheating. To my surprise, she admitted to it. On the night of my confrontation, she admitted everything. I was in a state of shock that she had simply told me that she was cheating. I do not recall what I was expecting. I believe I anticipated that she might deny it and claim that I was mistaken. However, she did not do so. I then inquired about the identity of the other party and the duration of their relationship. Her friends introduced her to him one day. It was an immediate and profound connection. He was exceptionally romantic, and I found myself unable to emulate that quality. I attempted to do so, but my wife felt that I lacked the requisite effort. This individual possessed qualities that I lacked and that my wife found attractive. She asserted that our marriage ended that night, and the divorce process commenced. It was not a contentious divorce, we reached an amicable agreement. The two parties agreed to divide their assets equally, with the house being sold and each individual taking half. This was perceived as the optimal solution for both parties to separate swiftly and effectively upon the conclusion of the proceedings. I proceeded to purchase a condominium with the funds derived from the joint account. I retained a substantial surplus, which I intended to reserve for future financial security. Subsequently, the house was sold, and I invested the proceeds. I also invested the money, as it was prudent to do so, given the unpredictability of future circumstances. My former partner, however, chose a different course of action. She used her financial resources to purchase a larger residence than the one we had shared. I subsequently learned that she was planning a lavish wedding, which I believe was her long-held aspiration. This information evoked memories of our own wedding. My former partner had resented me for many years because we never had the wedding she desired. In retrospect, I must acknowledge that I did look at the photographs on Facebook and observed the extravagant nature of the event. The cost of the celebration seemed exorbitant, and I could only imagine the financial outlay she made, including the cost of the dress. At that juncture, I recognized the necessity to disengage from this woman, who was my former partner. I was compelled to take a step back and cease my preoccupation with this woman, who was my former romantic partner. I chose to prioritize spending time with my friends and family, a decision that proved beneficial. I assumed that my former partner was spending time with her new romantic interest. However, I later discovered that not everything was as it seemed. I learned that a year after they got married, they were in debt. My former partner spent the divorce settlement on an expensive house and other expensive items. The wedding was a significant financial burden for her. While her job provided a decent income, her husband's income was the primary source of financial support in the household due to the unsuccessful venture he had invested in. She sought financial assistance from me, attempting to leverage our past relationship and shared experiences from over 2 decades. However, I was not persuaded. I informed her that it was not my concern that she had spent the entirety of her divorce settlement on inconsequential items. I continued to engage with her, and that night, I received at least 3 additional calls and 3 particularly unpleasant voicemails. After listening to them, I found them to be amusing and shared them with my friends to demonstrate her decline. They concurred with my assessment. My ex-partner exhibited a lack of shame and I was merely in a compromising position. I am uncertain if she ever truly believed that I would provide her with the financial assistance she sought. Even if she had reached out to me a few months prior, I still would not have granted her request. At no point was I ever in such a desperate situation. I terminated communication with her that night because I did not wish to hear further from her. Our relationship had reached its conclusion. She had engaged in infidelity and desired to pursue a relationship with her application, which represented a new romantic interest in her life, would have benefited financially from a more prudent approach than that of my former partner. The majority of my family and friends expressed satisfaction at her departure. I question whether they had ever truly liked her or were merely attempting to coexist with her out of obligation to me. However, my former partner was a part of my past, and that was where she would remain.